Sarah Winters clutched the golden locket in her palm, fingers tracing the delicate engraving that had once sparkled in the sunlight. Now tarnished with age and worry, it remained her final tie to better days. Outside her small cabin, the winter wind howled mercilessly, matching the storm in her heart as she glanced at her sleeping children. Their thin blankets and hollow cheeks told the story her pride refused to speak aloud. Tomorrow, she would walk to town and sell the last piece of her former life to feed the 3 small souls depending on her. The thought made her physically ill, but she had run out of both options in time. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Your comment helps our community grow stronger. Thanks, and let's get back to the story. The first light of dawn found Sarah already on the road to Clearwater, her threadbare coat pulled tight against the biting cold. 6 miles of hard-packed dirt stretched between her cabin and town, but the memory of her children's hungry faces drove her forward with each exhausting step. 3 years a widow with no family to turn to had taught her that pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Still, tears threatened as her fingers dipped into her pocket to touch the locket one last time. Thomas Reed watched from the window of his general store as Sarah Winters appeared on the horizon, her slight figure bent against the wind. Something in his chest tightened at the sight of her, just as it had for the 15 years since they were children together. He'd watched from afar as she'd blossomed into a young woman, as she'd married James Winters despite Thomas's unspoken feelings, and as she'd struggled alone after James's death in the mining accident. He straightened his collar and swept the floor for the 3rd time that morning, wondering what brought her to town so early. Sarah hesitated at the door of Pearson's pawn shop, her resolve nearly faltering. Maxwell Pearson had a reputation for driving hard bargains, especially with desperate sellers, but his shop was the only place in Clearwater that dealt in such transactions. She squared her shoulders, reminded herself that her children's needs outweighed her sentiments, and pushed open the door. The bell above the door jangled, announcing her entry into the cluttered shop. Maxwell Pearson glanced up from his ledger, his shrewd eyes assessing her worn clothing and determined expression. He recognized the look of someone with no choices left. Those were his favorite customers. "Sarah, I didn't expect to see you in town today," Pearson said, his voice carrying false warmth that didn't reach his calculating eyes. "What brings you to my humble establishment?" She swallowed hard, forcing the words past her pride. "I have something to sell, Mr. Pearson." Thomas Reed couldn't explain the impulse that drew him toward Pearson's shop after seeing Sarah enter. He told himself he was simply taking his morning walk earlier than usual, but his hurried steps betrayed his concern. Through the smudged window, he could see her standing rigidly before Pearson's counter, something small and golden dangling from her hand. The pawnbroker's expression, a mixture of feigned sympathy and poorly concealed greed, made Thomas's stomach turn. $8, Pearson said flatly, after examining the locket with exaggerated care. "It's tarnished, and gold prices aren't what they used to be." Sarah bit her lip. She had hoped for at least 15, enough to buy food for a month and perhaps medicine for little Emma's persistent cough. 8 would barely last 2 weeks, but the 7-mile walk back home empty-handed was unthinkable. "It's all I can offer," Pearson added with rehearsed regret, already reaching for his cash box, knowing she had no other options. The bell jangled again as Thomas entered, startling them both. He nodded politely, pretending his arrival was mere coincidence. "Good morning, Mrs. Winters." "Mr. Pearson." Sarah clutched the locket tighter, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. The last thing she wanted was for anyone to witness her desperation, especially Thomas Reed, who had always been kind to her family, extending credit at his store when others wouldn't. The truth was, Thomas had been far more than kind. After James died, he had anonymously arranged for firewood to appear on her doorstep, had spoken to the school teacher about waiving fees for her oldest, and had even planted vegetable starts near her property in the spring when she wasn't looking. All without ever letting on it was him. "I'll give you 25 for it," Thomas said casually, glancing at the locket as if appraising it from mere curiosity. Pearson's face reddened. "Now see here, Reed, this is my establishment, and Mrs. Winters and I were conducting business."
Thomas met Sarah's confused gaze.
"I've been looking for a gift for my niece in Boston. That locket would be perfect." Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly. Thomas had no niece in Boston, or anywhere else for that matter. His only sister had moved to California years ago, still unmarried. But the offer of $25 was more than she had dared to hope for, enough to see her family through the winter if she was careful. 30, Pearson suddenly countered, his thin lips pressed into a line of annoyance. Thomas kept his expression neutral, though inwardly he cursed. He hadn't intended to start a bidding war. 35, he replied, reaching for his wallet. Sarah looked back and forth between the men, bewilderment replacing her initial embarrassment. The locket, while precious to her, wasn't worth nearly so much. It had been a gift from her grandmother, valuable more in sentiment than in gold content. $40, Pearson snapped, even as his eyes betrayed his knowledge that the offer was pure foolishness from a business perspective. Thomas didn't hesitate. 50, and that's final. He placed the money on the counter, more cash than Sarah had seen in one place since James died. Pearson's face twisted with frustration, but he knew when he was beaten. With a curt nod, he backed away from the counter, busying himself with rearranging items on a shelf. Sarah stared at the money, then at Thomas, trying to understand what had just happened. Her fingers still curled protectively around the locket, unwilling to release it despite the fortune offered. "You don't need to do this," she whispered, low enough that only Thomas could hear. "I know you don't have a niece." His kind eyes held hers steadily. "Everyone needs help sometimes, Sarah. There's no shame in it." A moment passed between them, heavy with unspoken history. Thomas had been there the day she met James, had congratulated them at their wedding despite the pain it caused him, had been the first to bring food when James died. Always present, always kind, always keeping a respectful distance. With trembling fingers, she finally placed the locket in his palm, the metal warm from her grip. "Take good care of it," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. "It was my grandmother's." Thomas nodded solemnly, understanding the magnitude of what she was entrusting to him. "I will." As they left Pearson's shop together, the morning sunlight breaking through the clouds seemed like an omen of better things. Sarah clutched the money, still unable to believe her fortune, while Thomas walked beside her, the locket secure in his pocket. "Would you allow me to walk you home?" Thomas asked, gesturing to the long road ahead. "My horse is behind the store, and the ride would be easier than walking, especially with the wind picking up." Sarah hesitated. She had maintained her independence fiercely since James's death, refusing charity and working herself to exhaustion rather than accept help. But Thomas's offer came with no hint of pity, just the same quiet respect he had always shown her. "Thank you," she said finally. "That would be kind." As Thomas helped her onto his horse, their hands touched briefly, sending an unexpected warmth through Sarah's chilled fingers. She couldn't remember the last time someone had shown her such simple courtesy, treating her as a woman rather than a widow to be pitied or a debtor to be avoided. The ride to her cabin passed in comfortable conversation as Thomas asked about her children, 10-year-old William, 80-year-old Emma, and 6-year-old Jacob. Sarah found herself smiling as she spoke of William's skill with numbers, Emma's beautiful singing voice, and Jacob's endless curiosity. It had been too long since she had talked about her children as sources of joy rather than worry. When they crested the hill overlooking her small homestead, Sarah felt a pang of embarrassment at its obvious state of disrepair. The roof needed patching, the porch had a broken step, and the once white paint had faded to a weathered gray. Yet Thomas looked at it with admiration. "You've kept this place going all on your own," he said, genuine respect in his voice. "That's something to be proud of, Sarah." His words eased something tight in her chest. Most people saw only what was lacking, not what she had managed to preserve despite impossible odds. As they approached, the door flew open and 3 small figures burst out, faces lighting with surprise at seeing their mother return so soon, and with company, no less. "Mama, you're back already," Emma exclaimed, her thin face alight with excitement as she took in the sight of Thomas and his horse. "Mr. Reed was kind enough to give me a ride home," Sarah explained, accepting Thomas's help to dismount. She introduced each child, and Thomas greeted them with the same respect he showed to adult customers in his store. William, the oldest, regarded Thomas with solemn appraisal, his young shoulders already carrying the weight of being the man of the house. Jacob, the youngest, was less reserved, immediately asking if he could pet the horse. Emma, always observant, noticed her mother's lighter step and the absence of the locket she'd seen her take that morning. Thomas didn't stay long that first visit, understanding Sarah's pride and not wanting to intrude. But before leaving, he mentioned casually that he had some heavy work that needed doing at the store. Inventory to move, shelves to build, and wondered if William might be interested in earning some money on Saturdays. The boy's eyes widened at the prospect, and Sarah recognized the offer for what it was. Help disguised as opportunity, allowing them both to maintain their dignity. She nodded her permission, grateful for Thomas's understanding. That Saturday marked the beginning of a change for the Winters family. William returned from his work at the general store with not only money but also a basket of food that Thomas insisted was merely surplus that would spoil otherwise. Sarah recognized many items as things her children had mentioned liking during the ride home, but she accepted the gift with grace, recognizing the kindness behind it. Winter settled in earnest over Clearwater in the following weeks, blanketing the town in snow and keeping most residents close to home. Yet every Saturday, Thomas would arrive with his sled to collect William for work, and sometimes he would stay for a cup of coffee afterward, sharing news from town and listening with genuine interest as Sarah spoke of her small triumphs and challenges. Emma's persistent cough improved after Thomas discovered, quite by coincidence of course, that the doctor had prepared some medicine that another family had been unable to pay for. Jacob's boundless energy found purpose in small tasks Thomas created just for him at the store, and Sarah found herself looking forward to Saturdays with an anticipation she hadn't felt in years. It was on one such Saturday, as Thomas helped her repair the broken porch step, that Sarah finally asked the question that had been on her mind since that day at Pearson's. "Why did you do it? Why pay so much for a tarnished old locket?" Thomas looked up from his work, a hint of color touching his cheeks that had nothing to do with the cold. He seemed to weigh his words carefully before answering. "Do you remember the spring festival when we were 16? He asked, apparently changing the subject. Sarah nodded, confused by the shift. "Of course. It was the last one before my parents moved us to the Johnson Creek settlement." Thomas focused intently on the nail he was hammering. "I had saved for months to buy you a ribbon for your hair, blue to match your eyes. I carried it in my pocket all day, waiting for the right moment to give it to you." Sarah's breath caught. "I didn't know." He smiled ruefully. "I never found the courage. And then James arrived in town the next month, and the moment was lost. James was a good man. Better for you than I would have been back then." The admission hung in the cold air between them, honest and vulnerable. Sarah thought back to that young girl she had been, oblivious to Thomas's feelings, swept away by James's confident charm and ready smile. She wondered what her life might have been if Thomas had given her that ribbon, if she had recognized the quiet devotion that had apparently never wavered. "When I saw you about to sell that locket," Thomas continued, meeting her eyes at last, "I couldn't bear to see you lose something so precious out of necessity. Not when I could help." The simple truth of his words touched something deep within Sarah, a place that had been closed off since James died. She had been so focused on survival, on being strong for her children, that she had forgotten what it felt like to be seen, to be valued for herself rather than pitted for her circumstances. "Thank you," she said softly, the words inadequate for the emotion behind them. They returned to their work in comfortable silence, but something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings long buried but not forgotten. As winter gave way to spring, Thomas became a regular visitor at the Winters homestead. He never arrived empty-handed, always bringing some small necessity disguised as an afterthought or creating tasks that allowed William and Jacob to earn money and pride in equal measure. He taught William how to repair the leaky roof, showed Jacob how to set rabbit snares to supplement their meals, and brought sheet music for Emma, whose voice grew stronger with each passing day. For Sarah, he brought something even more precious: companionship, respect, and the gradual reawakening of feelings she had thought died with James. Thomas never pressed or presumed, maintaining the respectful distance that had been his hallmark for 15 years. But his eyes followed her when he thought she wasn't looking, with the same quiet devotion she had been too young to recognize all those years ago. It was Emma who finally broke the careful balance they had established. As they walked back from Sunday services, the little girl skipping ahead with Jacob while William walked soberly beside Thomas, she turned suddenly with childish directness. "Mr. Reed," she asked, "do you love my mama?" Sarah gasped, mortified, but Thomas answered without hesitation or embarrassment. "I've admired your mother for many years," he said simply. "She's the strongest, kindest person I know." Emma considered this with serious concentration. "Then why don't you marry her? Jacob needs someone to teach him to fish, and Mama smiles more when you're here." "Emma," Sarah scolded, her cheeks burning. "That's not something for children to decide." Thomas's eyes crinkled with amusement, but his voice remained serious as he addressed Emma. "Marriage is a very important decision that grown-ups make together. It's not something to rush into, even when there are fish to be caught." His gentle humor diffused the moment, and Emma nodded sagely before racing ahead with Jacob once more. But the question lingered in the air between Sarah and Thomas, giving voice to possibilities neither had dared address. That night, after the children were asleep, Sarah found herself unable to rest, Emma's innocent question echoing in her mind. She slipped outside to sit on the newly repaired porch steps, wrapping her shawl tightly against the spring chill. The sound of approaching hoofbeats startled her from her thoughts. Thomas appeared in the moonlight, looking equally surprised to find her awake. "I'm sorry to disturb you," he said, dismounting. "I couldn't sleep, and I thought I might check that the new fence posts we set are holding." It was a flimsy excuse, and they both knew it. The fence was visible from the road and clearly intact in the bright moonlight. Sarah smiled, seeing through the pretense but appreciating it nonetheless. "I couldn't sleep either." He sat beside her on the steps, careful to maintain a proper distance. For a while, they simply sat in companionable silence, looking out at the silver-washed landscape. "I still have it, Thomas said finally. "Your locket." She glanced at him, surprised. "I assumed you'd sold it in the city." He shook his head, reaching into his pocket to pull out the familiar golden oval. "I had it polished and the hinge repaired, but I could never sell it. It wasn't mine to sell." He placed it in her palm, the metal catching the moonlight. Sarah opened it to find the miniature portraits inside. Her grandparents as young newlyweds, their faces full of hope and promise for the future they would build together. "When I saw you about to sell this," Thomas continued, his voice low and earnest, "I understood what it meant, that you would part with something so precious for your children. It only made me admire you more." Sarah closed her fingers around the locket, emotion tightening her throat. "But you paid so much. I can't possibly repay you." Thomas shook his head. "I don't want repayment, Sarah. I want—" He trailed off, seemingly unable to find the right words. Instead, he reached slowly into his other pocket and withdrew a small, faded blue ribbon. "I bought this 15 years ago for a girl with dreams in her eyes and sunshine in her smile," he said, the ribbon lying across his open palm like an offering. "I've carried it ever since, as a reminder of chances not taken and words left unspoken." Sarah stared at the ribbon, its once bright color faded with time but still recognizably the blue that had matched her younger self's eyes. The thought of him carrying this small token for all these years, through her marriage to another man and the long silence after, touched her deeply. "Oh, Thomas," she whispered, not trusting herself to say more. "I'm not asking for anything," he assured her quickly. "I know it's too soon, and you may never feel for me what I've felt for you all these years. I just wanted you to know that some feelings don't fade with time. They only grow stronger and more certain." Sarah looked at the man beside her, really looked at him, seeing not just the kind storekeeper who had helped her family but the boy who had loved her silently. The man who had respected her marriage and her grief, who had found ways to help that preserved her dignity and independence. Thomas Reed had loved her consistently and unselfishly for 15 years, asking nothing in return except the chance to be near her. With trembling fingers, she reached for the ribbon. "May I?" He nodded, watching as she tied it around the locket's chain, binding the past and present together. The simple action felt significant, a careful step toward a future neither had dared to imagine. "I can't promise anything right now," Sarah said honestly. "James will always have a place in my heart, and my children must come first." "I would never ask otherwise," Thomas assured her. "Whatever happens between us, your children will always be my first concern as well." The sincerity in his voice reassured her. They had time to get to know each other in this new way, time for her children to adjust to his increased presence in their lives, time for her heart to fully heal and open to the possibility of loving again. "Perhaps we could start with supper," she suggested, a smile warming her voice. "Sunday after church. The children would enjoy having you properly at the table for once, instead of working on some project." It was a small step, but the joy that illuminated Thomas's face told her it was the right one. "I would be honored," he said simply. As spring blossomed into summer, Thomas became a fixture at Sunday suppers, and gradually at other meals as well. The children flourished under his attention, William growing more confident in his abilities, Emma's cough disappearing entirely as she grew stronger, and Jacob learning all the skills his young heart had yearned for. Sarah, too, found herself blooming in ways she had thought impossible after James's death. The constant weight of worry eased as Thomas helped her establish a vegetable garden that would feed them through the next winter, taught her bookkeeping skills that allowed her to take in work from town businesses, and simply lightened her days with his steady presence and unwavering support. By the time autumn painted the hills in fiery colors, the careful distance Thomas had maintained for so long had gradually diminished. Their hands would touch as they worked side by side, lingering a moment longer each time. Their conversations extended late into the evening after the children were asleep, sharing hopes and memories and quiet laughter. It was on one such evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues, that Sarah finally gave voice to the feelings that had been growing in her heart. "I used to believe that true love could only happen once in a lifetime," she said, her fingers absently touching the locket that now rarely left her neck. "That what James and I had could never be matched or replaced." Thomas listened silently, giving her the space to find her way through difficult emotions. "I've come to realize that love isn't something that must be rationed or limited," she continued. "What I felt for James was real and precious, and always will be. But my heart didn't die with him, though for a long time I thought it had." She turned to face Thomas directly, taking his hand in hers. "What I feel for you is different, but no less true. You've shown me that it's possible to honor the past while still embracing the future." The hope that kindled in Thomas's eyes warmed her more than any fire could have. He brought her hand to his lips in a gesture of reverence that spoke volumes. "I've loved you for half my life, Sarah Winters," he said softly. "I would be honored to spend the other half showing you how much." It wasn't quite a proposal, nor was she quite ready for one. But it was a promise of patience, of devotion, of a love that had weathered 15 years of silence and still burned true. The following spring, when wildflowers carpeted the hills and new life burst forth everywhere, Thomas officially asked for Sarah's hand, kneeling not only before her but before her 3 children as well, making his vows to all of them. William gave his solemn approval, Jacob bounced with excitement, and Emma, ever the romantic, cried happy tears that her matchmaking had succeeded. They were married in the small Clearwater church, Sarah wearing a gown that Thomas had secretly ordered from Denver, her grandmother's locket gleaming at her throat, now suspended from a faded blue ribbon that meant more to her than the finest silk. Thomas stood tall and proud, scarcely believing that the dream he had carried for 16 years was finally becoming reality. As they spoke their vows before God and the community, Sarah felt James's memory settle peacefully into its rightful place in her heart. Not forgotten, never diminished, but no longer a barrier to the joy that stood before her. Thomas had never asked her to forget or replace those memories. Instead, he had given her the greatest gift possible, the chance to create new ones equally precious in their own way. Their life together would not be without challenges. 3 growing children, a general store to run, and a homestead to maintain would ensure that. But as they faced the future together, Sarah knew with bone-deep certainty that selling her last possession had not been an ending but a beginning, the start of a chapter more beautiful than she could have imagined. Each night before sleep, her fingers would trace the outline of her grandmother's locket, now containing 4 miniature portraits, her grandparents on one side, and on the other, a new image of her children with Thomas and herself, their faces full of the same hope and promise that had sustained generations before them. We hope you enjoyed today's story. If you did, please like, comment, and subscribe for more frontier tales that warm the heart and remind us of simpler, though no less challenging times. Until next time, may your own journey be filled with unexpected blessings and second chances.